My name is Georgia Noble, and I am one of a small group of people who, this past summer, reconstituted Santa Barbara PFLAG. It's been about 15 years since Santa Barbara had a PFLAG chapter, and actually the original chapter came out of this church that we're here in this evening. So it's great for PFLAG to be back here. We are just delighted about our evening tonight and the panel who so graciously agreed to tell their stories of coming from inside their faith tradition and the struggle they've been through. I just want to say a little bit about PFLAG. For those of you who don't know, PFLAG, it's changing. They're dealing with their acronym. They've been around for about 40 years. They have over 350 chapters nationwide. And they're all about support, advocacy, and education for the LGBTQ community. And there was special emphasis in recent years on the T, the transgender. But PFLAG is just an amazing organization, and we're just delighted to be able to participate in having it alive again here in Santa Barbara. So part of our hope is that we just need to get the word out that PFLAG is here and it exists. We meet on a monthly basis, the second Monday of the month. Normally our meetings are at the Fund for Santa Barbara, which is at 26 West Anapamu. And if you'd like to be on our mailing list, there's a list at the entry. So the way the evening is going to go in just a moment, I'm going to turn this over to Alyssa, our host for the evening, hostess, and she will introduce the panel and host our presentation and discussion. The panel will speak to you. There'll be plenty of time for question and answers, and then there'll be a reception afterwards where we're going to have cookies, homemade cookies, and apple cider, and Frank has some books that he can sign. Anyone who wants to buy one of his wonderful books, they're going to be available. So I think at this point I'm going to turn it over to Alyssa. So welcome and thank you for coming. Alyssa.
Welcome everyone. I am the pastor here at First Congregational Church. I am newly here, only having moved to Santa Barbara for about 5 months now, I think. So it is my pleasure to open our doors and welcome all of you here. Our church has been an open and affirming church for many, many years and decades now. And so it just seems right to have PFLAG, now that PFLAG is back on its feet and doing such amazing work, to hold this panel here. So we at the First Congregational Church of Santa Barbara would like to welcome everyone here tonight. And I have the wonderful fortune of introducing our main speaker, and who will be our moderator of the panel. You'll learn a little bit more about me later. I'm on this panel. But we have the pleasure of hearing from Frank Schaefer, a Methodist minister who is also new. He got here around the same time I did. So there was a whole influx, and there's another minister coming into Montecito of new queer-friendly, and allies to the LGBT community. So I wonder what the Spirit is doing in Santa Barbara. But Frank is not just a pastor, but most importantly, I think he would say he's a father. And he is a father of 4 children, 3 of which are gay and out. And in doing the wedding of one of his sons, he was put into a situation in the Methodist Church that caused him to be defrocked. But thankfully, and recently, he was refrocked. So I am not a Methodist, so I cannot exactly explain to you what that is. So in our reception, while you're eating cookies and having hot cider, you can ask the Methodists in the room about being defrocked and refrocked. I have a hard enough time figuring out my own denomination. But Frank, it has been a pleasure for me, both of us arriving at the same time. We have sort of found a friendship, I would say, a new and blossoming friendship, and it has been a wonderful experience to get to know him, get to know his wife, and also get to know the amazing work that he is doing in the religious and not just the Christian community, but the religious community as a whole, to make it a more welcoming, safe space for those in the LGBT community and for those allies who are willing to take a stand for their brothers and sisters who are out or who are trying to become out and come from a spiritual background. So with that said, I'd like to welcome Frank, and I'd also like to welcome the other panel members to come and join me up here.
Thank you so much for having me tonight. It's truly an honor to be here. And I'll tell you what, I wish there had been a PFLAG chapter in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. After our son came out, we were looking for a group and there was none. We went as far as Mechanicsburg in Harrisburg. That's where the nearest one was. That was about an hour away from us. But we did find a group called the Wider Circle. That was a local group. It wasn't PFLAG, but it fulfilled a similar function. And we found friends there, parents of gay and lesbian, transgender children that we could really relate to and really talk to, and it helped us tremendously. So if I could have any say in it, I'd say Lebanon needs a PFLAG chapter. I've been a country preacher for 20 years, and I never thought that I would ever be in the national limelight on anything, especially not for performing my gay son's wedding. And so I'm still struggling with this new calling apparently I have to speak in front of groups and to even speak to the press. In many ways, I am very, very happy that my life is now getting back to a more normal life after I was defrocked recently and actually confirmed to be reinstated for sure, for good. So I thank God for the strength that He gave me and my family, especially my wife, to go through what we went through. It was truly, it was a very, very stressful time for us. It was a heartbreaking time. But it was also a time filled with new friends and challenges and blessings as well. And it all started when our son came out to us in the year 2000. And I have to tell you this story, even though you may have heard this again, but this is what gives me the passion to talk. Because I really believe that our church and that all religious communities need to hear this story. This is such an important story because my son, when he came out, said to us that he had heard a message from his own church, from the United Methodist Church, that made him believe that he as a homosexual could not go to heaven. And it plunged him into a deep depression. My wife and I had no idea what he was going through. We thought, oh, he's a teenager, he's going through this typical crisis. We noticed that he was going up to his room, coming home from work or school right away and locked himself in and didn't talk much. But we thought, this will pass. This is just like a normal teenage thing. We had no idea that he was crying himself to sleep every night, praying to God to please take this away from him. He did not want to be homosexual. He did not want to go to hell. That's what he believed. And he shared with us that it all started when I took him with me to an annual conference of the United Methodist Church in eastern Pennsylvania, and it just so happened that in that year there was a debate on the floor about homosexuality. And the message he heard there was that you can't be homosexual and go to heaven. Unbeknownst to me, he was already struggling with his sexual orientation at that point. And you have to understand one thing about my son, Tim, and that is that faith had always been very, very important to him. Even as a little kid, when he was maybe 5 or 6 years old, we caught him one Sunday in his room He had set up all his stuffed animals, like in a church setting, and he was preaching to them. He had the biggest contemporary Christian CD collection of anybody I knew. He was active in the church. He became involved as he wasn't even youth age, and he was already in youth. He preached on youth Sundays. He went with us to the prison ministry we had once a month, and he was part of our worship team. Faith had always been so important to him. So to hear this message from his very own church that he loved so much was devastating to him. He actually came to a point when nothing changed after all his prayers, that he thought the world would be better off without him. The pain was so big, had become so large, that he just thought, this is the only way out. I have to take my own life. The only reason he is still alive is because he had one girlfriend that he could trust, and he shared his story. And it was this girl's mom who called me anonymously to alert me to the fact that my son Tim is homosexual and is considering suicide. And that's how my son came out. When he came out and shared his story with us, my wife and I were just dissolved in tears. I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I wish I could have been there in those dark, dark times for my son, and I wasn't able to. And because I just didn't know. And we just hugged him and we said, we love you, Tim. We love you so much. You're our son, and that's never going to change. Our love is never going to change. And then we started to think and said, obviously you didn't want to be homosexual. You tried to pray this away unsuccessfully. So this means that this is the way God created you. You are created in the image of God just like everybody else. And God loves you, and God is proud of you, gay and all. And it took him many years, actually, from this point, until he was ready to accept himself who God had created him to be, a gay man. And so when 2006 rolled around and my son Tim called me on the phone and asked me, after he had gotten engaged recently, Dad, would you do the honor and perform the ceremony? There was no way I could have said no to my son. And I didn't want to. It was a joy. And I was so happy for him. And I said, absolutely, son, absolutely. And so I performed his wedding in the year 2007. And you have to understand that I wanted to make an announcement to my church. And we're going to talk about how we can take an active role in our faith communities, with a message of justice. But I ministered in a very conservative area in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. Now, Lebanon is somewhere between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. And there's a saying that, there's Pittsburgh and there's Philadelphia, and then there's Alabama in between. And nothing against Alabama, but it is a very, very conservative place. And I wanted to make an announcement so badly. Every parent wants to just shout it out to the whole world. My son is getting married. And I just felt like I couldn't, because it would have divided the church. And I tried to walk this fine line, as many of us pastors try to do. We have to be so diplomatic. We're always so careful not to offend this group or that individual. And I felt like I couldn't make that announcement, even though I wanted to. And I felt like I had to teach in very subtle ways about justice and peace, which I did. And even that got me into trouble, because almost 6 years later, after I performed the wedding in 2007, it was in 2013, right after Easter. It was the Tuesday after Easter Sunday, 2 days after Easter. I received in the mail a registered letter with a complaint against me about having performed my son's same-sex marriage. Somebody from my congregation had traveled to Boston, Massachusetts from Lebanon. That's about 300 miles. To get a hold of the marriage certificate with my signature on it, and got a copy of that, and that was the beginning of my complaint. And what I always feared would happen in my local church in Lebanon, Pennsylvania, did happen, and it was so painful to see the church split right in front of me over this issue. it went through families, and it went through friendships. It ended friendships. And it just divided the church. And it was one of the most painful things I have ever gone through in my life. Because I truly loved this church. I truly loved these people. And just to see that was just very, very, very painful. And then came the trial in 2013, in November. So it's been a little over a year ago that I faced this trial. I had no idea what a church trial was. I've never attended one. And so, but it was actually surprisingly a lot like a civil court trial. There was a jury, and there was a judge. Actually, it was a bishop of the church who acted as a judge. And we had witnesses, and there was evidence presented and arguments made. I had a counsel, and there was the counsel for the church who acted as the prosecution. And one of the things that happened after the story came out about my complaint that I was facing and what happened, we got so much encouragement from all around the country. Many, many of them were from the LGBT community, and many of them shared their sad, sad story about how they had been mistreated by the church. And I became so aware of the fact that this was not an isolated case. My son's case was not an isolated case. There were hundreds, maybe thousands of our LGBTQ brothers and sisters who have gone through the same struggle and are still going through it. And because of that, I just could not back down during my trial. And I knew that I was risking my career and my security, my paycheck, my job, and everything, but I just could not back down. I just knew in my heart I had to make a statement for my son and for thousands of others in the LGBTQ community that we had mistreated, that we had caused to commit suicide in some cases. And the church had to listen to that. And so on my last day of the trial, when I had already been found guilty the day before, I was asked if I were to repent, now that I had been found guilty, and I said, I cannot repent of this. In fact, I took out a stole that somebody had given me the day before, a rainbow stole. It was actually this stole. And I put it on me, and I testified in this court about my son and what the church's doctrine had done to my son, and what the church's doctrine was continuing doing in the LGBT community. And I said, we have to stop the discrimination. We have to stop the hate speech, and we have to start reaching out to our LGBTQ brothers and sisters like Jesus would have done. I said, we have to stop harming beloved children of God. And the prosecution came back on and for the cross-examination, and I could tell that they were really happy about my testimony, because I gave them every fodder they needed, and so the question was raised then, do you repent? And I said, I cannot. And they also asked, will you promise never to perform a gay marriage again? And I said, I cannot make that statement. And they did take my credentials. They did take my credentials. But something wonderful happened in the aftermath of that, a day after I was defrocked. And I have to admit, I was rattled by that. I didn't think it would happen, to be honest with you. I didn't think it would happen, but it did happen. And I was really sad, and I was disappointed. I was scared. I didn't know what to do, where to turn. Actually, somebody had offered me a job in the construction field, and I saw myself pouring concrete for the next 20 years until retirement. And I was just so rattled. I think that's a good word to describe my state. The day after I was defrocked, Bishop Minerva Carcano from our conference here in Southern California, the California Pacific Conference, called me on my cell phone. To this day, I have no idea how she got my cell phone number, but bishops have their ways of doing it. And she said to me, Brother Frank, that's what she calls me, Brother Frank, I want you to know that we have prayed for you, and that we believe that what you did was the absolute right thing to do in the spirit of Jesus, And we would like to invite you to come to our conference to be a minister here as a United Methodist minister. And I said to her, Bishop Carcanio, you didn't just make my day. You made my life. And I really meant it. And I had tears in my eyes. And it was just amazing to see how the United Methodist Church reached out to us during this time. And how I got invitation after invitation to speak at reconciling United Methodist churches. A reconciling United Methodist church really is a rebel church because they declared, in our church, we don't believe in discrimination. We will marry gay couples. And in our church, we will accept gay and lesbian ministers as our ministers. And so I'd never realized how much support there was within the United Methodist Church. Of course, there was so much support from outside the church, and the UCC was part of that, and the Episcopalian Church, and the UU Church, and the MCC Church, and so many other churches reached out, and it was just such a tremendous insight for us as a family to see that there was so much support, and we said, you know what? That's the true church of Jesus Christ right there. That is the true church. And because of that, we never lost faith, not even in the United Methodist Church, and decided to do whatever we can to work from within the United Methodist Church. As you know, I appealed the decision, and it was reversed back in June already, June 26th. And then the Council for the Church took it to the highest instance, our Supreme Court of the United Methodist Church, which we call the Judicial Council. And they affirmed the decision by the lower court. That they affirmed my reinstatement. And so now I'm done with this whole process. And my wife and I are so happy about that. Because now finally we can make our home here, we can build our ministry here, and just be regular people once again. But in one sense, I will never be regular again. And that is, this whole process, this complaint, starting with the complaint, has really outed me. And that's how I felt. It was like an outing to me. I could finally, after all these years of carefully navigating and being diplomatic and being subtle about my messages, I could finally preach the way I felt I should have all these years, but I felt I couldn't because I was afraid. And on that day when I put on this stole, this rainbow stole, and I gave my testimony, something incredible happened. That fear that I had carried in my heart for all these years, the fear of losing my career, of losing my security, that fear of losing my reputation, losing my friends in the church, losing my church, all that fear vanished at that moment when I really told them what was in my heart. It was an amazing moment. And I never, ever want to go back to that place of fear. I want to always speak the truth with courage. So that is my spiel tonight, and I thank you so much for listening to me. Thank you.
Could we ask a question?
Will you tell them about the questions? I forgot.
Yes, so the format is that we will have an introduction of all the panelists, and then we will be able to write questions on a piece of paper, and it'll be collected and be read and then answered by the different panelists.
So there are note cards on the end of each pew, and if questions come up for you as people tell their stories, just write them down, and toward the end we'll collect them, and then there'll be time for questions toward the end.
So let's hear from our panelists, and I don't know who wants to go first of you, but I can't wait to hear your stories.
My name is Max. I live with my wife, a professor at UCSB, here for 4 years. Can everybody hear? No, we need the mic. It's on. Hello? Oh, you met. I've only been in Santa Barbara for 3 years. We're coming up on our 4th And I am a social worker at the hospital, and I've been working for 10 years on trying to help people in my kind of profession work well with transgender people, and that's my social justice work. I am a Mormon by birth, and I'm a practicing Jew and a member of the Episcopal Church on State Street.
Hi, my name is Suzanne Peck, and I'm a Jewish mother. Oh, closer? Okay. I'm a Jewish mother. One of our sons is gay. We live in Santa Barbara, and I'm on the Santa Barbara County Commission for Women. And one of the things that I'm doing now in terms of working against prejudice and discrimination is a film and a curriculum that I've developed called Stand Tall. It's being used in schools around the country to teach kids about respect for differences and how to prevent and deal with bullying. As a practicing Jew, I'm a member of the Reform Community Shul of Montecito in Santa Barbara. So if you know anything about Judaism, you know there are many different types of Jews, from Orthodox to conservative to Reform to Lubavitch. The Reform community is really at the forefront in terms of social change and justice. And my rabbi, Arthur Schaefer, when I became bat mitzvah, which is a daughter of the commandment as an adult, one of the things that he taught me was that while there are 613 commandments in our Torah, and a lot of Orthodox Jews really try to understand and follow all of them, as a Reformed Jew, my commitment is to one request that God has of us as Jews is to love all people and treat everyone with dignity and respect. So our son, when he came out within the Reformed Jewish community, it was almost a non-issue. There wasn't any bias or discrimination. He's grown now, he's 33 years old, and he works as a music director, conductor, vocal coach. And in the world of opera and music theater, which is his profession, he's almost in the majority. Gay people are not minority. Gay Jews are not in the minority. They're in theater. So it hasn't been a challenge from that extent. But at the same time, politically, we see the challenges all around us. And in the past week, he's been demonstrating in terms of I can't breathe and all of the protests that are going on. He lives in Chicago. And I've been noticing, even with him sending me today, how things are changing for the better, as Frank says, and the wonderful work that Max is doing, Melissa, but also there's a lot of change that's alarming. Today, the state of Michigan Congress passed a bill that God, hoping the governor doesn't sign, that says EMTs do not have to take care of gay patients if they have a religious objection to it. So there's, things changing and things moving slowly, but for the most part now, I'm hoping that all of us coming together, and I'm honored to be here, I'm honored to see so many of you turn out, that all of us realize, whether we're gay or we have children who are gay, that we have an obligation to make our voices heard and to speak up against bias and injustice. So we welcome Lisa to our community. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
So I'm very loud. I'm Alyssa DeWolf. I'm the new minister here, as I said before. I am an out lesbian minister, but I grew up in the Assemblies of God Pentecostal Church, where nobody's gay. And I also grew up in Orange County. And I recently moved back to California, to Santa Barbara, after spending 8 years on the East Coast in New York City and in New Haven. And it really wasn't until my journey east, got directionally challenged there, my journey east, that I was able to come to terms with my sexuality and my faith. And it wasn't until I could realize that I wasn't going to hell and that I was created in the image of God that I truly could reconcile feeling called to ministry. Because I was a really good Pentecostal, and I was called to ministry at a very young age in the 7th grade at winter camp, because everyone has to get called on a mountaintop, and I got called on a literal mountaintop. But there was no language literally no language or words growing up in Orange County. Even though I am young, there still was no words to describe what I was feeling and what I was going through and who I was at my core. And so it took me moving to New York City as an 18-year-old to begin to find the language. And in beginning to find the language, I also realized that this faith that I grew up in that was so important to me, and I still identify as a Pentecostal UCCer. And I still believe that there are things about my upbringing that are really important and that I keep with me and are beloved to me. But I also went on a journey to understand God in a greater sense, and a God who is bigger than the rules and the small framework that I was given as a kid. And I tell everyone that if this happened in any other order, it wouldn't have happened. But I found the UCC when I attended Yale and Divinity School in Connecticut. And the UCC, the United Church of Christ, was a place that I found I could be completely myself and also be challenged. And I could be wholly who I am. And in finally being in a religious space where I could be completely who God created to me, it gave me the freedom to come out. And I came out like a lightning bolt. Because I figured out all the other parts of the sexuality, but I just needed to understand that God still loved me. Because if God didn't love me, then my whole world was meaningless. And so when I finally realized that, yes, God created me the way that I am and created me to be a minister and called me to ministry as a gay woman, that I jumped on the ordination bandwagon and now an ordained UCC minister pastoring this church in Santa Barbara. And before that I was a pastor in Newtown during the Sandy Hook shooting and was able to be there for the children there and help them through the horrible situation that happened there. But what I see now as a part of my ministry and my calling is to kind of hold the hands between the world, the conservative world that condemns those or who is not welcome to those in the LGBT community, and the open and affirming churches that may not necessarily know how to have the dialogue or the language. So I often find myself at lunches with old conservative friends coming out to me unexpectedly, but that's my calling and I love it.
Well, thank you so much. Do we have some questions already? Should we take some time to gather questions at this point?
Sure. Do people have some questions?
And in the meantime, maybe I can go ahead and ask a question of all of you. Well, at least with Max and as well as Alyssa, I've heard that you were struggling and coming to terms with your sexuality in terms of your faith. And one of the things I would really like to know from you is how did you get to that point, and how difficult was that? Was there a feeling of guilt maybe at times when you sort of like went against the traditional teaching that you've received and that you sat under for all of these years? How did you deal with coming to this realization, no, you know what, there's nothing wrong with being gay or lesbian?
I was baptized in the Los Altos Church ward in California, and in 2000, a man about my age shot himself on the steps of the ward because he left a letter explaining that he would never ever be out and be a member of our community. Los Altos Ward is a train ride away from the Castro in San Francisco. There was no shortage of people who could have been his community. But the church was so isolating that he didn't find a way out of it. I was raised by professors, many of whom both of my parents had many Jewish and gay friends in the professoriate, and because people had been out in my parents' lives, it meant that I was safe to come out to my parents. And when I came out to my parents, we left the church, the Mormon church, together.
I found community in Reform Judaism in the Bay Area, and now I have found community at Trinity Episcopal Church. But all of the community that I've ever found has been as a result of people being out about their sexuality and about their gender identity. So I'm a fan of things that out us, and I appreciate the things that have brought us all here today, including our family members who, when we started this program, Soup and Sharing at Trinity, we realized that the group that we weren't aware of as gay people was the parents of gay people, and how perpetually in the closet parents and family members can be, and how many times they have to come out in the world. I only have to come out once, but if you want to tell somebody my son is getting married, it's all the time. So I just wanted to say thank you to all of the parents and family members who are perpetually outing themselves. I think it saves people's lives.
I think you hit a buzzword for me in safety. I think is so key, because I didn't come out until grad school because I was not in a safe place. And even though, and I kick myself, I was going to NYU as an undergrad in New York City, the gayest town you could be in, and I was the most closeted kid you could meet. And because of that, it sent me into an incredibly deep depression. And to this day, my parents are still struggling with the fact of me being out and gay. They love the fact that I'm a minister, but they still, it's a journey for them. And I'm on a journey with them and helping them get out of the closet. So there was no way that I was going to talk to my family. And I was, searching for identity as a good college kid does, and found a group that looked a little similar to my Pentecostal upbringing, but was more evangelical. And I had really close friends at the time there, and we had one seminar where an ex-gay man who was now married to a woman came and talked to us and told us about how you could pray the gay away, and how it was just an addiction, and like alcohol, you just need to wake up every day and choose not to gay drink, I guess. And in my great little fundamentalist head, I was like, that makes sense. Because there was, again, no language, nobody to talk to. And by the time I was a senior in college, I was pretty sure about who I was and who I loved. And the one time that I decided to tell someone, to tell a really incredibly beloved person in my spiritual community, they told me to pray more. And so that just shut it down for me. And it wasn't until going to Yale Divinity School where I met people who were out, who lived their lives in a vibrant way, and who were also pursuing a call to ministry, that I was able to finally talk about who I was and what I was feeling and what this might look like with God. And it was literally the only time in my life that I had the chance to talk about this. And I think that's key, is creating places where people and kids feel like they can be heard. And that places where people feel like they can ask the questions and they can try out through conversation what they're going through. Because I didn't even have the opportunity to just say, I think I might be gay. It was just not a possibility. And so I really, Yale in a lot of ways saved my life. So it's all their fault.
And while we're still collecting or sorting through questions, I want to share this experience because I think it shows how much sometimes allies and parents of gays and lesbians struggle. I had an interview about 6 weeks ago with Megan McCain. She has a TV show and right here in LA, and she had an incredibly honest moment during this interview, and she actually asked me this question. She said, what would you say to me when I tell you that even though I am an ally and I support my gay and lesbian friends, but I have moments when I think that I'm going to hell for that. How would you have answered that question?
So one of my best friends is a fabulous South Carolina gay boy. And he grew up in the Lutheran church, and his parents actually put him through ex-gay therapy. And it's incredible because, that's not incredible, but it's incredible because his parents now have done an incredible, 180. And they're just beautifully supportive of him, and beautifully, they don't have all the answers, and they're still figuring it out, and they're still trying to figure out this kind of how this works with their faith, but they're there for him. But that's actually a little bit of a tangent. But something we'd like to talk about, and we've talked to about several times with each other, is growing up in a religion, and I'm going to call it a religion because I don't think that that's really what God believes. But growing up in a religion where you are told that if you are gay, you are going to hell. Well, hell is a very real, very, very scary place. And we still have days where both of us admit to each other that I wake up in the morning and go, maybe I am going to hell. And what a lot of people don't realize is in coming out of such conservative fundamentalist background is it creates a trauma that can take a lifetime to heal from. That you are so encoded and bred to think and be in such a way that for me, coming out wasn't just about claiming who I was, but it was radically redefining everything that I stood for. And in an embarrassing way, I felt like I was back in high school and had to learn how to date again. But it's almost like you have to learn how to walk again. And there's those days where you kind of buckle and stumble, and both of us, confess that, what if we're wrong? What if in one day, we're wrong? But it comes down to what we feel in our hearts, and what we feel in our guts, and what we think about who God is. And that, without a shadow of a doubt for me, is I couldn't believe in a God who hated people for loving each other, and who created people in only one way, but created a beautiful tapestry of people who are so diverse and so different, and express themselves in many different gender identities. And so it really comes down to that, and that was always the driving force for me. Even when I really did think I was going to hell, was God was always somebody who loved bigger and greater than I could ever imagine. And if I held on to that one thing, that's all that mattered.
Suzanne, I heard you say that you were in an environment, in a religious community that really was supportive. But did you face any struggles as your son came out with sharing it with others? What were some of your struggles that you had?
When our son came out, it really wasn't that much of a struggle. It was thinking about his safety. I'm thinking about the pain that I experienced, and nothing by comparison to what you experienced. Mine was more worrying about his safety and worrying about potential job discrimination, because he was quite young when he came out. We knew when he was very young that he was gay. We just, having two sons, and one loves wrestling and video games and cars and basketball, and the other loves Barbara Streisand and going to the opera with Grandma, and, he just knew when he was very young, and he was sure when he was 9. But he didn't suffer about it. He spent summers for 9 years going to Interlochen Music Academy. If any of you have ever heard of it, it's in upstate Michigan, and musicians from all over the world compete to go there. And he said, Mom, at Interlochen it's about 90% gay. And I kind of thought that was a high estimate, but for him what he was saying was, there's a community of people like me who are different, and it's okay. But I worried about not having grandchildren from him. I worried about what's going to happen in terms of safety, job discrimination, because the work that I was doing at the time, I spent 30 years doing corporate training on discrimination and harassment and diversity and inclusion. So I work with so many big companies, with Disney and GE and McDonald's, and I go in to do sessions and they say, well, we don't have any gay people here. I mean, people who were suffering from being in the closet and being in environments that were so difficult. And then what was really painful for me was when Doug got in a relationship with someone who's the son of 2 United Methodist ministers from a small town, and they had been evangelical, and they had both preached against homosexuality and had really tried to put their son through conversion and all that. So it was really difficult to feel that his parents won't accept our son. They never invited him to their home, and I wrote and reached out to them and they never answered. And it was painful for me to feel that there's a part of his life that will be different and difficult, and this, won't be able to share. In the Jewish tradition, we have machatanim. The in-laws and the in-laws are all friends, and we all get together. So feeling that separation was difficult. But the pain was more from looking at what's going on in the world, and will he be able to have equality in terms of marriage? Will he be able to live safely in this world, or will there always be harassment and discrimination, which is something that I was seeing on a daily basis all over the country. So, I'm glad to see that he picked up from our religion the spirit of tikkun olam, which is at the core of Judaism, which is to heal the world, to be social activists, to look at problems and say, how can I make a difference? How can I make my voice heard? So that's been a strength for me to see that, okay, times are changing, and what can we do about it that will really make a difference?
It is so refreshing for me to hear that there are religious communities like yours that are so affirming and really, practice what they preach, in terms of wanting to heal the world and really setting an example. That is so refreshing, because I too came from a very evangelical background. And so, it's a blessing.
One thing I just, because this for me was like a light bulb or something, a message from God. Because as I said, with Doug, I never experienced tremendous pain in terms of him coming out. But I was walking through an airport one day, and hold this for a second. I have to hold this up. If you're close, you'll be able to see this. But I saw a whole newsstand with this cover, People magazine, and I had just received a text from my son Doug with this picture. And if you can see the resemblance, I saw this from a distance, deadly bullying, and I saw this kid that looked just like my son. And I thought, okay, this is Tyler Clemente, who committed suicide because he was bullied about being gay. And I thought, that's my son too. And then it was like a message from God saying, you have to do something about this. Because it could have been Doug. It looks like the same kid to me. And just, I saw this, I started crying. I said, we can't let this be, because the rate of suicide among children who are coming out is so much higher. The rate of bullying in schools among kids who are LGBTQ is about 3 times what it is for kids who are straight. So, I see all that and it breaks my heart and think we have to make our voices heard.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
For those of you who can't see Doug's pictures, he's pointing to a sign that says, "All that I am, I owe to my mother." Quite a testimony.
But obviously, society is changing in this country, and to the better. And so we have gay marriage rights now in 32 states? 35 now. We're up to 35. I can't even keep track anymore. This is so wonderful. And so there is a momentum swing in the right direction, and there's a lot of support now. But there are still communities that are struggling, that are closed, that are conservative still on this issue. What is your advice for parents of LGBTQ, for allies, for friends in the workplace that may be conservative, or in their faith how would you advise them to go about spreading the word of justice?
I think come out, come out, come out. Always be outing. So always have the picture of the friends or family members that you had just went to their gay marriage on your workplace desk. Always be interrupting hate speech, it goes without saying, but always being somebody who's walking around in the world as someone who loves a queer or gender non-normative person. That work is all there is, because somebody wants to talk to you about that. They just need to know that you're the kind of person they can talk to.
And I would say speak up as much as you can. When you hear the gay slurs, speak up, don't let it slide. If you're dealing with the schools, make a lot of noise. We're blessed to live in California. California's state laws are the most progressive in the country in terms of the teachers now have a responsibility in the curriculum to work in positive images of LGBT people, just like they do about minorities and women in social studies and in the context of education. So I know some teachers resist this. When I came out with my film, I have one thing in my film about a boy saying, maybe he's gay, maybe he's not, but what's the big deal? And I had teachers saying, oh, I can't use that in my class because I'm not prepared to talk about sexual orientation. Well, that was in Indiana. In California, guess what? They have to talk about it. It's part of curriculum now. So if you're in the school system, speak up if your child is getting harassed or discriminated against. Same in the workplace. And the majority of the large corporations now have employee affinity groups that were started by employees. So they have the gay pride or the LGBTQ support group. If they don't have one, they should start one, because there really isn't a company anywhere that doesn't have some gay employees. So like Matt said, speak up and speak up with pride, right? And make your voices heard. I mean, we have good laws in our state. We don't have federal laws yet, but hopefully we'll get there in the next 10 years. But we have good state laws to take advantage of, and school policies that really need to be enforced. If they're not enforced, make a lot of noise, is my advice.
So I agree with both of them, but I'm also going to bring a different perspective also, in the sense that, so I grew up in Orange County, and my family still lives in Orange County, and it is in California, but there are still places in California where it is not necessarily safe and welcoming, and where speaking up is not necessarily the right thing to do in that moment. For example, my 10-year-old niece who's in the 6th grade, we took her out. I can't even tell the story because we took her trick-or-treating. My partner and I took her trick-or-treating, and we found out from my sister, because my niece was so excited that her gay aunt was coming with her partner to trick-or-treat, and told all her friends who were going to come trick-or-treat with her that 2 of her friends couldn't come because we were gay. And it makes me mad because I almost want to kick myself that I thought that things were better. And so there are definitely situations, and there are definitely places where the work still has so much farther to go and so much more to do, and it's still here even in our own backyard. And so I think when you have the chance to speak up and speak out, yes, absolutely. Marriage equality turned a corner, not because of these great protests or great lobbying work, that was a big part of it, but it was because more and more people had friends and had family and had neighbors and had coworkers who were out and gay. And suddenly that other person, that other thing, and all those stereotypes just didn't fly when your friend is coming to you and saying, I'm gay. They're your friend. And so yes, it's so important. But I also think that if we find ourselves in situations where it is traumatic and there is bullying, whether it's in a church that doesn't support us, work is a little harder, but when you're in a situation or a school that doesn't support you, to be able to find a community that can support you and be able to find a community that can gather around you And one of the legacies of the LGBT community is that when families can't be there for their kids, another family emerges within the community. And this is something that has really been able to keep the community going and going and going. And so I just encourage people not to think that it's not everyone's calling to fight the fight in whatever particular context. Some of us are called to stand at the forefront and to fight the fight, but some of us are called also to stand back and to be able to live our lives fully and wholly in a safe environment. So I just wanted to kind of add that we have to be careful of thinking that it's okay to out ourselves all the time and everywhere, because sometimes it's not. But creating safe places and safe spaces where we can be fully ourselves is most important, and seeking those out. And if you can't find any, and I mean, we're speaking from a spiritual community on this panel, go find your spiritual communities that say that they're open and affirming or reconciling, or what do the Episcopalians say? Hooray! Hooray! Episcopalians say hooray. Different churches have their taglines of LGBT openingness, and hold them accountable. Hold them accountable. Go to their pastors and say, we need a space, we need a place, we need a group, we need you to walk the walk and not just talk the talk. So.
I do have a couple of questions here from the audience, but before we go to these, there are three of them. I would like to ask one more question. Obviously, the LGBTQ community has been disillusioned by many faith communities and have actually decided not to be part of a faith community. That's not true of all of them, but percentage-wise, it's a larger group among the LGBTQ community than it is about any other group, just about. How can we, as faith communities, reach out in this day and age, and how can we basically reach out with a message of love and acceptance now, even in the face of the fact that many of them have received hateful messages from their faith communities? What can we do to overcome this?
I'll speak for the Episcopal Church here in town, which started a group called Soup and Sharing. We opened up our space in the church to 8 meals together with an increasing number of people every week, actually, talking about this exact phenomenon, the experience of people who have a relationship with a faith community and then a relationship with a non-normative sexual orientation, and where those things intersect and how we can come farther and closer away from our faith communities and farther and closer away from our identities. And the kind of communion that we had together led to a great number of healing conversations, and also led to the foundation of PFLAG in this town. So I feel like the faith communities have everything that it takes to advance the healing and advance the social justice projects that we all need.
And I'll just add to that, if you weren't there today, an example was today at lunch in the sunken gardens of the courthouse, there was an interfaith peace vigil, and 13 leaders of clergy were there from so many different faiths, and Reverend Frank was there. It was just so beautiful to see that when we come together, we realize we have more in common than we knew, and the common belief in God and in peace and praying for peace brings us together and makes us more inclusive and stronger. As you know, we're blessed to live here in Santa Barbara, but to see that the interfaith community is so strong here really is an inspiration in terms of looking to all the religions to say, how can we reach out to parents and children who are coming out and who want to be respected and loved for who they are.
Speaking as a Christian minister, one of the things that I get inspiration from is Jesus. But that Jesus went and lived among the people. That Jesus didn't sit in a temple and waited for people to come to him. And for me, that was a call to show up. And to show up in places where I might not necessarily belong, but to show up fully as a Christian out gay minister. And that's how I show up. But for example, in Newtown, I was a volunteer with the Gay Straight Alliance in the local high school. And I just came to meetings and sat in the back and listened to these brilliant LGBT kids and allies, but was there as the minister in the UCC church in town, just to be able to sit in the room and say, there is something else. There is another way of looking at faith and church, and that the church is and can be a place that is supportive and welcoming to these kids, and to give them another perspective and another idea. And so I think a lot of our work is just showing up and being able to be open and honest about who we are and not to hide ourselves when we walk in the room. I think that for me has been kind of a calling in itself, is just to be able to walk in the room fully as not just gay, but also as whatever religious group you are a part of. Because I think oftentimes we feel like we have to choose one or the other. And it can be really hard being spiritual, whatever spiritual you define yourself as, and be LGBT along that spectrum. Because the LGBT community has every right to be upset and angry and want nothing to do with the church. But the fact is that the church is only one part of the equation. God is another part, and it's our job as the church to get the message of God, the real message of God, I would say, out there to those who have heard something else.
What I want to add to this is I was actually a part of a similar panel in Washington, D.C. A couple months ago, and it was moderated by Bishop Gene Robinson, who was such a hero to me personally, and such a holy man. And we talked about the same question, and he said, you know, the very first thing we have to do, we have to tell our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, we're so sorry. This should have never happened. This should have never happened. Not in the church. That should have been, or in the religious community, that should have been a safe place for you. You know, where there should have been a message of love and acceptance. And I think that apology will go a long ways. I mean, I totally agree with him. It just feels right. You know, we have to make that apology and reach out. One of the questions that we got from the audience is a very interesting question. Is there any meaningful way to take the message of reconciliation, so the message of justice, into a conservative faith community instead of leaving it? So I'm understanding this question to mean if you are a person, an ally, if you are a gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer, and you are a part of a conservative faith community, is there a meaningful way in which you can try to change your community from the inside out instead of leaving it?
Good luck. I'm going to try and say this in the shortest way possible because there's a lot of dynamics that go into this. One of the things I do a lot in working and dialoguing between those who maybe claim themselves to be more progressive and those in the conservative world is that there are two different languages that are happening. And so often those who are becoming more progressive or finding themselves more middle of the ground or liberal will say, you know, why can't conservatives just get X, Y, and Z? Why can't they read that book or read that study or article? Why can't they just get it? Well, growing up as a conservative, you are taught how to rebuttal every single argument that goes against what you believe. So that conversation doesn't work. And so the biggest thing is there's short-term things we can do, but really when it comes to changing the hearts and minds of those in the conservative, fundamentalist world, is living life with people and being committed to live life with them. And that takes a lot of energy and a lot of diligence, and it's going to be a long process. Because what you're really trying to show in living life is the humanity and the complexity, that this is not an argument about right and wrong, that this is about a dynamic, living relationship. And you'll find that a lot of the things that conservative and fundamentalist places put their hats on can be places that those who are in the LGBT community can as well. You know, and I'm still kind of trying to pinpoint all of those, but it really comes down to the fact of being able to ask questions and teach those who are in a different mindset to ask questions. Because when you come from a conservative, fundamentalist Christian background, you are told what to think, and you are told how to live. And your main goal and aim is to achieve those ideologies so that you either don't lose your salvation or that you can become the best Christian that you can be. And so when it comes down to that, there's not any room for questions, and there's not any room for doubt. And doubt is looked at as the great evil of that world. And so what I like to say to progressives and what I like to say to liberals is one of the things that you can teach those who think differently than you, one of the kind of, best gifts you have in your back pocket is the ability to teach others how to ask questions and how to question what they believe. And so I get in a lot of conversations with conservatives who are very, emphatic about what they believe, and I sound like an annoying toddler, where I'm just, well, why? Well, why? Well, what about this? Well, why? And it's not a conversation where I'm telling them all the facts, and it's not a conversation where I'm saying, the Surgeon General said da-da-da, or the psychological study, da-da-da. That doesn't work. But being able to say, why do you think that? And what about this? And have you thought of that? And to get someone to be able to expand their way of thinking and their idea about the world is kind of your starting point, is living life with people and asking people why. But it's going to take a while. And I'm talking a lot, I would like to say that it is not talked about as much in the news, but there is a huge underground movement going on right now, especially in the evangelical world, where more and more, and it's being driven by millennials, it's being driven by young people who are standing up and saying, no, I'm not going to be discriminating against my LGBT brothers and sisters. And no, I think this might be wrong. And we have to really encourage that and support those. And we need to support those who are in the questioning phase, because the questioning phase is huge for someone coming out of that background. And we can't expect them to just get to the answers. So I do want to say that there is a huge movement going on, and there is a slow change coming afoot within that world, and we need to look out for it, and we need to support those who are in that community, who are really doing the hard work.
Just to add to that, I want to double down on the part where if you're not somebody who's at risk from coming out, if you can come out and keep your job, and if you can come out and keep your physical safety as an ally to somebody who maybe can't keep their job or can't keep their physical safety. So this is a time for allies of the trans community. I'm not a trans person, I'm an ally of the trans community. I do public speaking about trans people's welfare. It's safe for me to do that. I can't lose my job when I do that. In 37 states in this country, trans people can lose their jobs when they come out of the closet. So this work is an important moment for people who are allies of the GLBT community to do the thing that they can do, that you can do.
And just quickly, if I could show you one more magazine cover. New York Magazine, on the cover, the highest paid female CEO in America used to be a man. So the cover story is fascinating, but so, you know, here's someone who's transgender who's now on the cover for being the highest paid female CEO in the country. Amazing.
If I can follow up with a question of my own, it was interesting that you mentioned there's a movement underfoot in the evangelical part of the faith community. At the Reformation Project panel that I was a part of, Danny Cortez was one of the panelists, as well as Reverend Wilson, who wrote the book about the Third Way. We have something similar in the United Methodist Church proposed by Adam Hamilton and Mike Slaughter about a way forward, they call it. There seems to be this thinking that comes out of maybe the more conservative evangelical camp that we could get along with each other if we just suspend the judgment and agree that, you know, this question is actually shouldn't be in the center of our discussion, because there are so many other faith issues that have more priority, that we should not over-prioritize this issue and just suspend judgment. So accept everybody for what they believe about homosexuality, about transgender issues and so forth, and just love each other anyway and get along within churches. And in the United Methodist Church, the proposal goes that we leave it up to every individual church how they want to handle this issue, whether they want to allow gay marriage to go forth, whether they will accept a gay or lesbian minister. What do you think about that approach? Is that a viable approach? Is it something that you think is worthwhile?
Me.
I think it's a Band-Aid. I think it's a Band-Aid, but it is not a cure. And I think it's great and wonderful that we're willing to stand in the room together and talk to each other, because that's not happening. But I think saying, you know, let's just love everybody and not be judgmental, well, it sounds a lot to me like what has been said to me many, many, many times, and said to many people in the LGBT community, is love the person but hate the sinner. Hate the sin. I think I said that wrong, because love the sinner and hate the sin. Thank you. I blocked it out of my mind. But, and you know, when I was kind of in that world, I was like, yeah, totally, you know, love the sinner, hate the sin. But the more I started thinking about that, I was like, wait a minute, you're telling me I believe I'm created by God. I believe that what I'm doing is not a choice. I'm believing that what I'm doing is not, you know, a singular act that we can call a sin. So therefore, if you are going to love me, you have to love this part of me. You can't just pick and choose what you love about me. And the reality is you saying that is not very loving.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be able to sit with each other fully as we are, and be able to sit with each other and listen, truly listen. I did a lot of work and continue to do a lot of work with interfaith and interfaith dialogue, and the interfaith dialogue that works is not one where everybody comes in the room and we're like, we all believe in the same God and it's so great and wonderful, and it's not the one where we come in the room and we say, this is how we're all similar. What interfaith dialogue that has been incredibly productive and incredibly done some amazing work in places like Israel and Palestine, and places where, you know, the work is critical in itself, is when everyone is allowed to come in the room just as they are. And instead of us trying to figure out how we're just all the same, or how we all are one version, different versions of the same thing, instead we look to each other and we say, well, why do you do that? And what does that mean? And tell me more about that. And it's where people are able to come and dialogue about what it means to be fill in the blank. And I think we really need to have those conversations. And I think it's going to require both of us extreme patience and a lot of grace and a lot of uncomfortable, awkward moments where we may not agree with that person. But the more we can talk to each other, the more we will be able to find common ground. And so I think that's nice, but I don't think it's enough. And I think the church really needs to be held accountable for its actions. And as much as we would like the conservative and fundamentalist world to change, I think we also, in a way, need to find ways to show grace to them and to be able to create spaces where we can allow them to come and work this out with us. And that's going to be hard, and it's going to be uncomfortable, but it's definitely necessary. What do you think, Frank?
I actually thought along the same lines that you have. It struck me as wrong because the church speaks with a very powerful voice. The church speaks to our salvation, our soul salvation. And what the church is saying about, in terms of making judgments, is just incredibly powerful, and it can be very, very destructive. And I've seen it in my son and in the stories of so many others. And I think it's high time. We are overdue for a change in the church, and we can't. To me, this is like really a half step. If we're still saying, well, it's okay for you to believe, we as a church are saying it's okay for you to believe that homosexuals are sinful and are going to hell. I cannot accept that. That hurts me right here. You know, as a parent of 3 gay children, I can't take that message, and it's not enough. It's not enough. I mean, as much as I understand, maybe there has to be, we have to give people time, to go through this process themselves and ask these questions. But it's not okay for me to allow somebody to say that homosexuals are sinners and are going to hell. This is not okay for me. This is not acceptable to me. So.
Just wanted to make one more statement. Being this is a PFLAG meeting, I would like to say too that we need the older generation more than ever to be the generation that stands up and says this is not okay, and stands up and says I love my, whether it's your kid, your grandkid, your friend, your coworker, because I think those are sometimes the most powerful moments, is seeing people who are, my parents' age or my grandparents' age, especially my grandparents' age, a generation where we are told, that's the generation that's not going to welcome you because of, old ways of thinking. Being able to stand up and say, no, this is not okay, and we need things to change. And I think it goes to what Max's point of saying, if you yourself may not be in the LGBT community or may not be in a position where you can speak up, if you are an ally, this is your moment. And this is your moment to speak up and to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves, and to be a voice for your generation. Because being a voice in the older generation, I cannot think of her name, but the Lutheran minister in Colorado. Nadia Bolz, thank you. Nadia Bolz, my favorite story that she tells on an NPR podcast is when her church was growing, a bunch of middle-class, New England-looking, white elder people came into her church and decided they wanted to join. And she said, this is not okay. We are the church of the transgender kid and the LGBT kid and the punk vagabond with tattoos. We are not the church of middle America. And in talking to some of her members, the transgender kid said, I'm really glad that these people are here because they look like my parents, and my parents wouldn't come to this church. And that's huge. You who look like our parents, who look like our grandparents, your support carries more weight than you can even imagine.
Let me add to that and say that someday in this town we'll have a gay pride parade, and then as PFLAG waving members, you will get to have the experience that I have had in many cities in this country as a person who goes to gay pride marches. When the PFLAG contingent comes down the street, everybody cries. We all cry. We all run right into the street and hug the mothers and the grandmothers and the grandfathers that we are seeing, wishing that it was ours.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. There's so much we can do. There are actually a couple of questions that were directed directly to me, and one says, what about your other children? It was said you have 3 gay children, 4 altogether. It was much, much easier for Debbie and Kevin to come out, of course, after Tim had already come out. And it was much easier for them also because we affirmed them right away, and they knew we were going to affirm them. So it was just a very smooth transition for them, and they knew they were going to be supported. And they didn't face the same issues, thank God, that Tim faced, even with their faith, because our messages were loud and clear. You know, God loves you, God created you the way you are, and you're cool in God's eyes. And so that really helped. In fact, I always say our family is a true LGBT family. Half of us are gay, half of us are straight, and so because our first 3 children were gay, we were always wondering about our youngest, about Pascal. Is he gay? Is he straight? And so he was the very first person, probably, in history that had to come out as straight. That's a little different from most families. I want to give an opportunity to all of you to say anything that's on your heart that you want to add to what you already said or what was shared tonight, if you're willing to.
I would say participate with PFLAG. I mean, we're new. We've just had, Georgia, 5 meetings so far. But the idea of being able to share your experience and support each other is just, it's so meaningful and so inspiring. And my husband and I had an opportunity to march in London for the F-flag. In Europe, it's not P-flag, it's F-flag. Families and friends of lesbian and gays. And I know just the support and energy that you get from participating and being part of this community is really going to be something that will be meaningful for you. So I encourage you to continue to come to our PFLAG gatherings, and we're here for each other. That's all we can do.